The Principles of Economics by Carl Menger. Chapter 8. The Theory of Money. Section 3. Money as a measure of price, and as the most economic form for storing exchangeable wealth. Since the progressive development of trade and the functioning of money give rise to an economic situation in which commodities of all kinds are exchanged for each other, and since the limits within which prices are formed become progressively narrower under the influence of lively competition, it was easy for the idea to arise that all commodities will stand, at a given place and a given time, in a certain price relationship to each other, on the basis of which they can be exchanged for each other at will. Suppose that the prices of the commodities listed below, assuming them to be given quantities established in a particular market at a given time, are as follows. Now if it is assumed that the average price of a commodity is one at which it can be both bought and sold, then 400 weight of sugar appears, in the example, as the equivalent of 3 1/3 hundredweight of cotton. This is the equivalent of 16 2/3 hundredweight of wheat flour, and 100 thalers, and vice versa. We need only call the equivalent in this sense of a commodity, or one of its many equivalents in exchange value, and the sum of money for which can be both bought and sold its exchange value in the preferred sense of the term, to arrive at the concept of exchange value in general, and of money as the measure of exchange value in particular, which dominate our science. In a country in which there is a lively commerce, writes Turgot, every kind of good will have a current price in terms of every other good, which means that a definite quantity of one good will be equivalent to a definite quantity of every other kind of good. To express the exchange value of a particular good, it is evidently sufficient to state the quantity of another known commodity that is regarded as its equivalent. From this it can be seen that all kinds of goods that can be objects of trade are measured, so to speak, against one another, and that any one of them can serve as a yardstick for all the others. Similar thoughts have been expressed by almost all other economists, who come, like Turgot in the course of his famous essay on the origin and distribution of national wealth, to the conclusion that money, among all possible measures of exchange value, is the most suitable, and hence also the most common. The only defect of this measure is said to lie in the fact that the value of money is not fixed, but changeable, and that money therefore provides a reliable measure of exchange value for any given moment, but not for different points in time. In my discussion of price theory, however, I have shown that equivalence of goods in the objective sense of the term cannot be observed anywhere in the economy of men, and that the entire theory that presents money as the measure of exchange value of goods disintegrates into nothingness, since the basis of the theory is a fiction, an error. When a hundredweight of wool of a given quality is sold in a particular transaction on a wool market for 103 florins, it is often found that transactions are taking place at higher and at lower prices on the same market, and at the same time, at 104, 103½, and at 102 and 102½ florins, for example. Often too, while the buyers on the market declare themselves ready to take at 101 florins, the sellers simultaneously declare that they are willing to offer only at 105 florins. What in such a case is the exchange value of wool? Or to state the same question in the inverse fashion, what quantity of wool is the exchange value of 100 florins, for example? Obviously, all that can be said is that a hundredweight of wool can be bought or sold on that market at that time between the limits of 101 and 105 florins. But a particular quantity of wool and a particular quantity of money, or any other commodity that can mutually be exchanged for each other, that are equivalents in the objective sense of the term, can nowhere be observed, for they do not exist. There can thus be no question of a measure of these equivalents, a measure of exchange value. It is true that several economic objectives of practical life have given rise to a need for valuations of approximate exactness, especially valuations in terms of money, where only an approximate correctness of the estimates is required. Average prices can properly serve as the basis of valuation, since they are generally most suitable for this purpose. But it is clear that this method of valuing goods must prove itself completely insufficient and even erroneous, even for practical life, wherever a higher degree of precision becomes necessary. When an exact valuation of goods is necessary, three things must be distinguished according to the intention of the person making the estimate. He must direct his attention to estimating 1. The price at which certain goods, if brought to market, can be sold; 2. The price at which the goods of a certain kind of quality can be bought on the market; and 3. The quantity of commodities or the sum of money that is the equivalent to the particular individual himself of a good or of a quantity of goods. The basis for making the first two estimates follows from what has been said. Price formation, we have seen, always takes place between two extremes, the lower of which may also be called the demand price, the price at which the commodity is asked for on the market, and the higher of which may also be called the supply price, the price at which the commodity is offered for sale on the market. The former will generally be the basis for making the first estimate and the latter the basis for making the second. The third estimate is more difficult, since it involves the special position that the good or quantity of goods, whose equivalent in the subjective sense of the term is under consideration, occupies in the economy of the economizing individual. For when he estimates this equivalent, he is also considering whether the good has predominant use value or predominant exchange value to him. When quantities of a good are involved, he is considering what portion has predominant use value and what proportion has predominant exchange value to him. Suppose that A possesses goods A, B, and C, which have predominant use value to him, and also goods D, E, and F, which have predominant exchange value to him. The sum of money he expects he could obtain by selling the first group would not be an equivalent of these goods to him, since their use value to him is the higher economic form. Instead, only a sum of money that would purchase identical goods or such goods as have the same use value to him would be an equivalent of these goods to him. Goods D, E, and F, however, are commodities and hence intended for sale. In the ordinary course of events, they will be exchanged for money. The price expected for them by economizing individual A is generally indeed the equivalent of these goods. The equivalent of a good can be correctly estimated, therefore, only with respect to the possessor and the economic status of the good to him. The prerequisite that is necessary for the determination of the equivalent of a complex of goods, a person's property, is the separate estimation of the equivalent of each consumption good and each commodity in the complex. Although the theory of exchange value in general, and as a necessary consequence the theory of money as a measure of exchange value in particular, must be designated as untenable after what has been said, observation of the nature and function of money teaches us nevertheless that the various estimates just discussed as distinguished from measurement of the exchange value of goods are usually most suitably made in terms of money. The purpose of the two valuations is the estimation of the quantities of goods for which a commodity may be bought or sold at a given time on the given market. These quantities of goods will ordinarily consist only of money if the prospective transactions are actually performed. And knowledge of the sums of money for which a commodity can be purchased or sold is naturally therefore the immediate objective of the economic task of valuation. Under conditions of developed trade, the only commodity in which all others can be evaluated without roundabout procedures is money. Wherever barter in the narrow sense of the term disappears, and only sums of money for the most part actually appear as prices of the various commodities, a reliable basis for valuation in any but monetary terms is lacking. The valuation of grain or wool, for example, is relatively simple in the terms of money. But the valuation of wool in terms of grain, or of grain in terms of wool, involves greater difficulties. If for no other reason than because a direct exchange of these two goods never takes place, or only in the rarest exceptional cases, with the result that the foundation for such a valuation, the respective effective prices, is wanting. A valuation of this kind is therefore usually only possible on the basis of a computation involving as a prerequisite the prior valuation of the two goods in terms of money. The valuation of a good in terms of money, on the other hand, can be made directly on the basis of the existing effective prices. The valuation of commodities in terms of money thus not only answers, as we saw before, the ordinary practical purposes of valuation most effectively, but is also the most convenient and the simplest in practical operation. Valuation in terms of other commodities is a more complicated procedure that presupposes prior valuations in terms of money. The same may be said about the estimation of the equivalence of goods in the subjective sense of the term, since again the first two valuations constitute its prerequisites and foundation. Thus it is clear why the only commodity in terms of which valuations are usually made is money. In this sense, as the commodity in terms of which valuations are, as a rule, and most suitably made under conditions of developed trade, money may, if one desires, be called a measure of prices. I have explained above the reasons why estimates can generally be most effectively made in terms of a commodity that has already attained money character whenever such a commodity exists, and thus why estimates are actually made in these terms, unless peculiarities of the commodity that has become money prevent it. But this outcome is not a necessary consequence of the money character of a commodity. One can very easily imagine cases in which a commodity that does not have any money character nevertheless serves as the measure of price, or cases in which only one or another of the several commodities that have attained money character serve in this additional capacity. The function of serving as a measure of price is therefore not necessarily an attribute of commodities that have attained money character, and if it is not a necessary consequence of the fact that a commodity has become money, it is still less a prerequisite or cause of a commodity becoming money. Actually, of course, money is generally a very suitable measure of price. This is especially true of metallic money, because of its high divisibility and because of the relatively greater stability of the factors determining its value. There are other commodities that have attained money character, weapons, plate, bronze rings, etc., but which have never been used as a measure of price. The function of serving as a measure of price is not, therefore, contained in the concept of money. Several economists have fused the concept of money and the concept of a measure of value together and have involved themselves as a result in a misconception of the true nature of money. The same factors that are responsible for the fact that money is the only commodity in terms of which valuations are usually made are responsible also for the fact that money is the most appropriate medium for accumulating that portion of a person's wealth by means of which he intends to acquire other goods, consumption goods, or means of production. The portion of his wealth that an economizing individual intends to use for purchasing consumption goods attains that form in which he may at any time satisfy his needs in the most certain and most rapid manner if it is first exchanged for money. The portion of an economizing individual's capital that does not already consist of specialized factors of intended production is also, for the same reason, more suitably held in the form of money than in any other form, since any other commodity must first be exchanged for money in order to be further traded for the desired means of production. In fact, daily experience teaches us that economizing men endeavor to convert that part of their store of consumption goods into money which consists of goods that they no longer intend to use for the direct satisfaction of their needs, but instead regard as commodities. Similarly, that part of their capital which does not consist of factors of intended production, they turn first into money, and thereby take a not inconsiderable step in furthering their economic purposes. But the notion that attributes to money as such as the function of also transferring values from the present into the future must be designated as erroneous, although metallic money, because of its durability and low cost of preservation, is doubtless suitable for this purpose also. It is nevertheless clear that other commodities are still better suited for it. Indeed, experience teaches that wherever less easily preserved goods rather than precious metals have attained money character, they ordinarily serve for purposes of circulation, but not for the preservation of values. If we summarize what has been said, we come to the conclusion that the commodity that has become money is also the commodity in which valuations answering the practical purposes of economizing men, and in which accumulations of funds for exchange purposes can most appropriately be made provided that no impediments founded upon his properties stand in the way. Metallic money, which writers in our science always have primarily in mind when they speak of money generally, actually answers these purposes to a high degree, but it appears to me just as certain as the functions of being a measure of value and a store of value must not be attributed to money as such, since these functions are of merely accidental nature and are not an essential part of the concept of money.